Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and let's make a fabric catch-all tray. Now, a catch-all tray is just a little fabric tray that we're going to be able to throw our keys or stuff from our wallet when we're coming in and out of the house. It can be used in the kitchen, bathroom, anywhere in the room. Now, I'm going to be making them from 10-inch pre-cut squares, but you can make them from any size squares, and all it's going to do is just change the size of that little tray. So let's get started and you'll see how so very easy it is. We are going to need 2 squares of fabric, and they do need to be the same size. Now, if you do not want to use just plain fabric squares, if you have leftover blocks, you can always use those. But in this case, I'm just going to use these pre-cut 10-inch squares. On the back side, I will be putting a fusible interfacing. You can use a lightweight or a medium weight, and in this case I will be using an iron-on. So there's one side that has these little dots on it, and that's the glue side. So following the directions of your interfacing, we need to glue that on back sides of both of those squares. Once that interfacing is on both squares, just put those edges together and feel if it is going to be stiff enough to be a tray. If you find it's not stiff enough, you can always add another layer. So the fusible can be put in layers. And I'm going to double up on it so that it really is a nice stiff tray. So I'll have 2 pieces of interfacing on the backs. Once that interfacing is fused on, place the right sides together, match up the edges, and we need to stitch around. We do need to leave a little bit of an opening, and my general rule is my 4 fingers. So I'm going to stitch and stop. So this will be my opening. And a 1/4 inch seam allowance will be just fine. So I've gone all the way around and have left a little opening. We need to trim off some fabric on those corners. So that was my stitching line, and what I want to do is trim off that little triangle. So we're going to just snip that right off. We want to come close to the threads, but not touching the threads. So we're going to have corners that look like that, and do all 4 corners. Once those corners are done, we're going to press back this little opening. So pretend that you had a row of stitching and press back where that seam would be. So you're going to want to do it to the one side and the second side. Once that one area has been pressed down on both sides, turn it right side out. Poke out those corners, being careful not to poke through. Now we're going to be able to press this flat, and those seams that we pressed over are going to match up and make it really easy to close that end off. Take this back to the machine and do a little row of stitching all the way around the outside, and keep as close as you can to that corner, and that way you're going to be able to close that off. So whatever you're comfortable with, just stitch all the way around. So it's stitched all the way around, and that opening is now closed. We need to decide what area is going to be the outside and what's going to be the inside. These are going to come up and make edges. So we just need to decide, what do you want inside and what do you want on the outside? In my case, I'm going to have that solid green inside. So on the back side, I need to make some marks. So on the back side, I'm going to draw some lines. My lines are going to go over 2 inches from this edge. That 2 inch will be the size of the wall. So if you want a really deep one, you're just going to do a larger wall, which means your center will be smaller. But for this 10-inch square, I'm going to do 2-inch borders. Use some kind of a marking tool that will fade or will steam out. And mark 2 inches all the way around, going from one side right to the other. We're going to go back to the machine And we're going to stitch this inside measurement. Start on one area, do a little back stitch, stop, pivot, and go all the way around. And this centerpiece will be the bottom of the tray. Once that's been stitched, we're going to stitch these corners. Fold so those two marks are going to match. And when those match, that corner will match. We now need to stitch along that line. So we're going to stitch that edge, match up the next lines, stitch. So we're going to go all the way around and stitch those four corners. And those markings on the back will guide us along the way. So we have those corners stitched. This is all the stitching we're going to do. Because we stitched around the outside, it already is going to give it that shape. And if you're happy with that, well, you're done. But you can press this a little bit more to give it some body. The first pressing is be careful not to press those corners and press right here on this seam. You're going to do that all the way around. That little ironing already makes a big difference. We're going to iron these points in. Just fold them so our points are coming up. Just press so that point is in line with that seam and do all 4 points. When we press those corners up, they look like little animal ears. But that's all we need and the tray is now done. Because I drew that 2-inch line, I do have a 2-inch side and I have a 5-inch bottom. So this can be made with any size square. All you're going to need to decide is how big do you want the walls, how big do you want the bottom, and you're going to have to add that. 2-inch, 5-inch, 2-inch, and then add that seam allowance. So you can make them starting with those 10-inch squares or the 5-inch squares. It was the same thing, but in this case, I just did a 1-inch wall. So I have just a little bit more than a 2-inch square in the bottom. And that's all there is to making these little trays. So these little trays can be used to catch a lot of different things. Keys, wallets, phones, change, jewelry. We could bring them into the sewing room, bring them into the kitchen, and we could bring them in pretty much any room in the house. And if you want to, you can always wash them and just repress them to give them the shape. And just think of all the different fabrics that we could use. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.